Okay, section 10.3. Now we're going to be factoring a trinomial in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c. So now we have a coefficient in front of our x squared term that's no longer a 1. So let's do an example. Number 101 in section 10.3. So number 101. This is section 10.3 on page 542. And we have 8z squared plus 2z minus 15. So now we're going to be using the AC method and grouping to factor this polynomial. Let's first identify our A is 8, right? Our B is 2. Remember, A, B, and C are just the numbers, not the letters, not the x's. So 2, and C is negative 15. Okay, so now we need to figure out what A times C is. A times C is 8 times negative 15, which equals negative 120. Okay, so now we're going to look for factors of A times C, or factors of negative 120, and they have to add up to our B, which is 2. Okay. Another clue is, remember I told you about the different signs, right? So that sign, because it's negative, it tells us that we're going to have a positive and a negative factor. So the factors are different signs. The fact that we have a plus in front of our 2 here tells us that the larger sign is going to be positive. Okay, so we're looking for factors of negative 120. Well, one of the things you should remember is that any number that ends in 0 is divisible by 10. So we could try 10 and 12. Let's just try that, right? Because 10 times 12 is 120. We know that one of them has to be positive and one of them has to be negative. So we know that the larger one is positive and the smaller one is negative. So we have negative 10 and positive 12. Well, does that work? Does that add up to positive 2? Sure does. So those are actually our factors. Right off the bat, we found them out. What we're going to do then is we're going to rewrite our original problem. We're going to rewrite 8z squared, 8z squared plus 2z minus 15, and we're going to use our new factors. So we've got 8z squared, and instead of 2z, I'm going to make it negative minus 10z plus 12z. So remember, negative minus 10z plus 12z gives me a 2z, so I've just rewritten it that way, and I have a minus 15 here. So now I've got 4 terms. So what should I think? I should think grouping, right? So I'm going to group my first 2, group my last 2. I don't have to do anything because that I have a positive between my 2 groups. And now I'm going to look to see, well, what can I factor out of the first group here? So I can factor out in 8z. Whoops, I'm sorry, not 8z. I can factor out a 2z. And I'm left with 4z minus 5. And out of my second group, I can factor out a 3. And I'm left with 4z minus 5. And it's a good thing I see this, right? I have 2 of the same. So those 2, I have 4z minus 5 is one of my factors. And my other factor is a 2z plus 3. And that's my final answer. Okay? Okay, let's try one more. Let's see, number 123, and this is on page 543, and we're going to factor 35 a to the fourth plus 9a cubed minus 2a squared. Well, that doesn't quite look like what we've been working with, but we can get it into that form. Remember, the first thing we should check to see is whether or not we have any common factors among our three terms, and sure enough we do. Maybe not in our coefficients, but we can factor out an a squared. So let's just factor that out. We have a squared, and then we're left with 35a squared plus 9a minus 2. Well, now that looks like something we can work with. So we're going to work with just this part of it. Okay, just that. And we're going to remember to bring down our a squared term at the end as a factor. So over here our a, not to be confused with our variable a, but it's 35. Our b is 9. And our c is negative 2. So our a times c is negative 70. Okay, so we're going to look for factors of negative 70 that add to our b, which is 9. Okay. So again, from our last round we know that, remember that dividing by 10, anything that ends in a 0 is divisible by 10, so we could try 7 and 10. Now again, remember, from our original problem here, we have a minus. That tells us that our factors are going to be two different signs. So one's going to be positive, one's going to be negative. And then the positive sign here tells us that the larger one's going to be positive. So let's try negative 7, positive 10. Well, does negative 7 plus 10 add up to 9? No, it adds up to 3. So that doesn't work. Well, we can also try, we also know that anything that ends in a 0 or a 5 is divisible by 5. So let's try 5. And 5 goes into 70 14 times. And we know one's positive and one's negative. We know the smaller one's negative. So try negative 5, positive 14. So we have negative 5 plus 14 equals 9. Look, that's the one that we want. So we're going to rewrite our polynomial here. 35a squared plus 9a minus 2. And we're going to rewrite that as 35a squared. Instead of plus 9a, we have minus 5a plus 14a minus 2. And now I'm going to group. And again, I don't have to worry about changing this sign over here because it's a positive in between my two groups. So I can just group them. And out of my first group, I can factor out a 5 and an a. And I'm left with 7a minus 1. And in my second group, I can factor out a 2. And I'm left with 7a minus 1. So again, I'm very glad to see that I've done my factoring correctly. I have a 7a minus 1 in both of them. And then I'm left with a 5a and a plus 2. So I have 5a plus 2. And that's my answer.